Does it matter that the artists we enjoy are kind, good people? I don't know about you, but it is kind of important to me. So, it's with a heavy heart that I am discussing today one of my absolutely favourite composers, Ludwig van Beethoven, to report on his most shocking and shameful behaviour. Carl van Beethoven, the son of Beethoven's younger brother, Caspar, and Caspar's wife, Johanna, and please excuse me when I call her the anglicised Johanna, was born in 1806. It seems Johanna was pregnant with Carl before their marriage, which may be significant in the events that were about to unfold. I should say that we have no surviving portraits of either Johanna or Caspar. These are just generic. Anyway, just a few years after the marriage, Caspar contracted tuberculosis and eventually died in 1815 when Carl was just 9 years old. Caspar's will awarded joint custodianship to mother and uncle, Johanna and Beethoven, but Beethoven immediately contested that will, trying to gain sole custody over Carl. What then ensued were years of legal struggle, with Beethoven at first losing the case, but then taking it to a higher court and eventually winning the battle and gaining full custody of Carl. So, now at the sprightly age of 49, the deaf bachelor Beethoven had full guardianship over his adolescent nephew. Yes, it sounds like a bad sitcom, Uncle Ludwig. But Beethoven had managed to pry a son away from his mother. Why? Well, Beethoven disapproved of Johanna, morally disapproved. Beethoven himself often referred to a charge of theft Johanna had acquired in 1809 while trying to pawn a watch. That charge was dropped, but Beethoven still, unfairly, used the original charge as a basis for her being a bad influence on her son. Was there another reason? Was the pre-marriage pregnancy an issue? Perhaps she had a relationship with someone after Caspar's death? I'm trying to imagine the worst of circumstances to attempt to explain Beethoven's monomaniacal obsession with trying to separate Carl from his mother. One thing we do know is that the young Carl was left desperately saddened by the events. On a number of occasions he tried to run away to her, and did run away to her, only to be returned to Beethoven by force. Beethoven, rather than realising the poor boy must have just missed his mother, assumed with paranoia that Johanna was manipulating control over Caspar behind the scenes, that she was poisoning his mind, and so he redoubled his attempts to control every aspect of Carl's life. A young man, it should be said, who doesn't have any particular affinity with music. It seems the pair had little in common, and Carl remained not just deeply unhappy, but I would say clinically depressed. Things just got worse and worse before spiralling to a nightmarish conclusion in 1826 when the 19-year-old Carl shoots himself in the head with a pistol. In later life, Carl took to combing his hair across his face to hide the scar from the bullet, which had grazed but not penetrated his skull. And how responsible was Beethoven for his nephew's actions? Well, when questioned by the police, Carl simply said, "My uncle drove me to it." After this a clear attempt on his own life, Carl is hospitalised in Baden. Johanna visits her son, and an ageing and infirm Beethoven finally and reluctantly allows the contact, or at least no longer legally disputes it. The composer himself is now just a year away from his own death. How Ludwig van Beethoven struggled for years to maintain control over a boy he was manifestly unsuited to look after is beyond me. Yes, Beethoven had a very strong moral sense, but that must have been paired with a righteous ignorance and stupidity and arrogance. To think that he, a man with zero experience with children, and for that matter close to zero experience with women, to believe that he would serve as a better parent than the boy's own loving mother, and there is absolutely nothing in the records to suggest Joanna was anything but a loving mother. For him to behave with such colossal moral arrogance and stupidity is surely the blackest mark on Beethoven's behaviour. And that's particularly true when you look at how Beethoven conducted himself over the whole process. He lost the original case, but petitioned a higher court through his influence, not as an uncle or caregiver, but through his power as a court composer. He used influence to retry his case and influence to win it. Beethoven also oversaw a very nasty pressure campaign against Karl's mother, smearing her at every opportunity with no actual evidence. He kept citing that 1809 conviction with the pawning of the watch, even though it had been overturned. Everything else was whispers and innuendo. Beethoven exerted that pressure campaign over Karl himself during the young adult's most formative years, controlling who his nephew could see and virulently trying to prevent any contact whatsoever with Joanna. He also hired spies, or informants as we should properly call them, to watch both Joanna and Karl, including Karl's own school teachers. He intercepted and censored letters between Caspar and his mother. He even sent back birthday presents Joanna had sent to her son back to her unopened. Beethoven also took the most confrontational legal routes possible, constantly refusing compromise or agreement, but continuing costly litigation for years and years, years that surely affected poor Karl's mental state. And, I'm afraid, it also affected us. Beethoven's output slowed whenever there was activity in the case, which means we, the listeners, also lost out from the whole tawdry affair. Yes, I know morals and mores have changed, and the composer's actions look worse than they would have done in the 1820s. And yes, I know Beethoven was acting like the responsible eldest in the family. Yet Beethoven's insistence that he knew more about a child's upbringing than his own mother still chills me to the bone. I'm presuming knowledge here, but I reckon in Beethoven's head, the fact that he was a famous composer gave him more moral authority. How arrogant that is, how morally arrogant. Beethoven was attempting to save his nephew, but in reality, he almost destroyed him. Right at the very end, Beethoven may have realised the error of his ways. Barry Cooper, the great Beethoven scholar, reckons that the composer's final composition before death was a canon with the German text Wir irren allesamt, nur jeder irret anders. We are all mistaken, only each in his own way. Please like and subscribe.